I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Mike Tischler. Mike is the director at USGS's National Geospatial Program, and he's going to talk to us about the business case for geospatial.
I'm Mike Tischler, Director of the National Geospatial Program at the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm really excited to be invited to speak to you today about building a business case for geospatial. I wanted to start with looking at this word geospatial and how it's changed over the past maybe 5 or 10 years. It used to be used as an adjective and still is, geospatial data or information or architecture or systems. But we're seeing it used more and more, like it is in the title of this session, as a noun, where it's describing something much, much larger. It's the community of people, the impact we have, the business uses, impact on societal development goals. It's a much larger concept. And you must be doing something right if the rules of grammar and syntax have to be rewritten because of it. So let's dive into it. A bit about the National Geospatial Program itself. We're the national mapping agency for the United States. We provide foundational geospatial information focusing on topography for the country. We want to make sure that our data is accurate and that it's available, discoverable, and usable in ways that people can incorporate it very, very easily into their business processes or decision-making processes. I do want to make sure people understand that geospatial data and information are part of a much larger piece of the global economy and the national economy here in the United States. I think that's a story that may not get told as much as it should. A 2012 study showed that geospatial services drove more than $1.6 trillion in revenue. That's a large number. I think some time ago, and some people probably still believe that when you talk about geospatial data information, that's a niche market with specialists and enthusiasts. That is not the case. We have demonstrated value across a whole host of industry segments, commercial applications, and government. It's critical to the supply chain of a number of industries and sectors like banking, real estate, agriculture, and investing and focusing on geospatial maturity of your data information and systems can bring benefits to you in a variety of different means. There's recent studies here that have shown the impact of geospatial data on gross domestic product. And I think it's very clear to understand now that this is no longer just a niche or a special field. This is a big part of economies across the world. Within the National Geospatial Program, we have focused on documenting the value we provide to the public, which is something that's very difficult to do, but also I think really, really critical and has been very useful for our program. Within the NGP, we have a couple of different programs we focused on documenting the value for. The 3D elevation program, which is collecting a new high-resolution elevation data set across the country. The national hydrography data sets, which represent the nation's drainage network and surface water across the country. And the national map, which is the platform through which we disseminate all of this to the public without a license for free. We have what we think is a best practice around studying and quantifying the return on investment and the value and benefits this brings to our customers and stakeholders. 3DEP was started with a study called the National Enhanced Elevation Assessment. We're undergoing a revision of that called the 3D Nation Elevation Requirements and Benefits Study. With the National Hydrography Dataset, we've recently concluded the Hydrography Requirements and Benefits Study, which documents the value of an improved hydrography dataset. And finally, with the National Map, we've looked at an industry use study to understand how our topographic services and data are being accessed by industry and commercial ventures and how they're used or reused across the span of industry. The National Enhanced Elevation Assessment was really a benchmark for us in quantifying the value of a high-resolution elevation data set before we had produced one. The results show that there were close to 13 billion in potential benefits annually from having a high-resolution elevation data set. That justification helped us scope an 8-year project, help us decide what specification we should collect data to, the quality levels, and really was enough justification that legislators saw value in funding our program to do this, as did hundreds of local and state governments and other partners. That's allowed us to progress across the country and collect data for about 75% of the country now. LiDAR is not the right instrument for collecting high-res elevation in Alaska, at least in this case. We used IFSAR, which allows us to penetrate clouds. But we're 100% done with that IFSAR collection in Alaska, and that brings us to about acquisition for close to 3/4 of the United States, which is really, really exciting. We're not going to stop, though, because we need to understand now, 8, 9, 10 years after that initial assessment, how have requirements changed for our customers? Technology is able to get us different answers or better answers and more accurate answers, particularly with inland bathymetry and nearshore bathymetry. We're working with NOAA to survey a variety of our stakeholders and partners to understand what their requirements are, not just in topography like we're used to collecting for elevation, but also for bathymetry and nearshore, and stitching all of those together. We're doing this in a technology agnostic way. We're not focusing on LiDAR as a solution or structure for motion. We want to understand what's the best way to get the data our customers and stakeholders and partners need. This will give us the plan for the next generation of 3DEP, maybe lead us to new approaches for quality levels, how we refresh the data that we've already collected, the products we offer, and a number of other changes. What we've done so far is we've surveyed 53 federal agencies, a number of other governments at different levels, more than 200 non-governmental organizations, a number of academics, private companies, and other organizations to understand their requirements and how they rely on elevation, both bathymetric and topographic. What they come back to us with are more than 1,300 mission-critical activities. These are activities upon which these businesses and organizations rely on elevation data that we've binned into 30 different business uses. And what you see ranked here are those business uses by the number of mission-critical activities in each one. We're still in the middle of analyzing the responses and understanding the value of each business use, but I can tell you that we're estimating that there's more than or close to $8 billion in estimated future annual benefits from including or improving our elevation data set based on meeting the requirements of our customers in this survey. Inland bathymetry itself will provide more than $2 billion in estimated annual benefit. Switching to hydrography, we concluded a study a year or two ago, very much in the same way as the 3D Nation study, where we surveyed a number of different federal agencies, states, tribal governments, national associations to understand how current and future user requirements and the benefits of an improved hydrography data set would benefit these companies. What they came back to us with were that we could, if we met all of their needs that were documented with a new hydrography data set, that would be more than $1 billion annual benefit to all of these people, which is really great. It quantifies and documents what that value is. It's important to note too that the benefits may be significantly higher than what we've estimated. Much like we saw with NIA, people didn't know exactly how they would use a high resolution elevation data set because they'd never had one. I think the same thing is the case with hydrography, that some of the respondents just weren't able to capture what that dollar value would be. So this may migrate upwards in reality. What we learned from the HRBS is that there was a desire for an alignment of hydrography data with elevation. There was also a desire for integrating hydrography with wetlands data, and that people would like the hydrography updated at least every 5 years. We are definitely heeding this advice, and we're working very hard on what we call elevation-derived hydrography, where we're looking at leveraging the LiDAR that we've spent so much time and energy collecting to produce the next generation of hydrography. We conducted a study on the commercial use of national mapping. These are all the rich array of services that you're used to getting from the National Geospatial Program. This was a really interesting one. We know people use our data a lot. In just 1 month, we've had more than 460 million hits on our dynamic base maps and topo maps and LiDAR point clouds, but we have a very difficult time understanding what happens once they leave our servers. We know very well the use cases that our federal partners and some of our state partners use our data for because we communicate with them pretty often and we have mechanisms to do that. It's much harder for us to understand how industry or commercial ventures are relying on this data, even though we know they're being downloaded. To get around this, or to find out or to fill in that knowledge gap, we commissioned a study to understand the type and application of USGS NGP data used by private companies. They looked at a number of our logs from our servers over a few years to understand the requesters and what types of companies these were. They were binned into categories and then profiled and surveyed to understand the kinds of services these companies offered and which industry sectors they were serving. Some of the results were really interesting to look at. The map products that we produce are still our most popular offering, not just the US topos that we update on a routine basis, but also the historical topo maps that we've gone back in and scanned for more than 100 years. Really, really exciting. Elevation has been growing and growing and is given all the emphasis on 3DEP and collecting LiDAR coast to coast. This is exciting to see that people recognize the value and are accessing this data more and more. The private mapping companies that access data are relying heavily on the maps and elevation products. The vast majority of private mapping companies come to us for maps and elevation. Hydrography and contours and other products are used, but maps and elevation are clearly used heavily by private mapping companies, which serve not just themselves for value-added products, but also other businesses and governments. Within those private mapping companies, we're also very well diversified. It's not just GIS companies or companies specializing in Earth observation. Regardless of the type of private mapping company, they are heavily reliant on our data. And that was very gratifying to see and reinforces the value we have and why it's such a good investment. And then within the industry served by these private mapping companies, it's not just one or two industries, it's a dozen or so. And it's really great to see that we have, like you would expect and hope, there's broad-based use of geospatial data. And finally, this is a good example of how our data is being used in application by just the infrastructure industry. And the study that we conducted and commissioned broke this down into the same types of applications for 5 different industry types: utilities, natural resource management, banking, retail, in addition to what you see here for infrastructure, which shows that geospatial data is being used all along the life cycle, specifically where that occurs. It's really valuable to us when we try to explain and justify why geospatial data is an investment and where it is used. In summary, it is really important to recognize that geospatial data and information and systems and people are a mature, dynamic, and growing segment of the US and global economy. This is not just a niche field for enthusiasts. This is a definite economic driver. Strong investment value in the National Mapping Agency data is well justified and quantified. It is a good, sound investment with benefits in a variety of means. That value can be returned to the public through direct access and use of the products and services, through commercial services from the mapping companies to other businesses or state and local governments, numerous government programs and services, and perhaps most importantly, growth in the national economy and jobs. I really want to thank you today for attending this session. It's really exciting to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions.
That's great, Mike. Many thanks for your presentation. You've covered a lot of ground there. Hopefully you can hear me, Mike, so if you can unmute yourself and share your webcam, that would be great. And we've got time for a few questions and answers. So again, if I could encourage attendees, please just to type your questions into the chat box, and we'll take those. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, Mike, you mentioned in your presentation that you've developed some best practice for business cases, return on investment cases. Could you just, I mean, I know it's probably not a 2-minute answer, but could you share with us some of the elements of that best practice that you've identified?
Yeah, well, it's quite a difficult thing to do, and we've relied on support from private companies to help us survey respondents in a variety of industry sectors and government levels at local and federal and in between, because it really is a value represented at a huge spectrum, and there's no way that within the resources we have within our own program on our own people would be able to do that, particularly in an unbiased way and in a way that is a really good study and according to statistics and the way that you would have to quantify something like a return on investment with geospatial data. But we found that it's really essential and valuable if we want to be able to communicate value of our products and services or even our future vision to decision makers and legislators.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, and I guess it's sort of fairly obvious really, but these are pretty substantial pieces of work you've done on cost benefit.
They are, yeah, and they've been great benchmark documents for us that we refer to time and time again, and they're really wonderful to pull out in a variety of venues or forums because you can tell the story really easily with concrete numbers. It's not just a qualitative explanation when you're talking about the dollar figure of benefits versus the investment that's going in to collect the data, and that it's 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, or 10 to 1, depending on what it may be, and how that can be leveraged with other investors. It really helps to have an independent study that has gone the extra length of quantifying it with surveys and numbers to go through all the way.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting also what you're finding about the use of your data. I was struck by the significant use, I would say. 25%, I think, was interest in the historical data.
Yeah, it's that whole study was something we often ask ourselves. We have a number of federal partners that we speak with pretty frequently. There's some statutes and laws that limit the extent to which we're able to directly survey the public to understand how they're using our data, whether they're a private citizen or whether they're a company. And truth be told, there's enough surveys when we're on web pages that we really don't want to fill out one more. Having a study that was dedicated to understanding how industry is receiving and using and applying these products was really essential, because we know just from the downloads of our own data, there's millions and millions and millions, but we don't get that feedback signal.
Yeah.
But we can at least tell by the volume that historical topo has been really popular since we started the scanning effort. I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10 years ago. I think the reason why is, number one, they're just beautiful pieces of cartography. A lot of those were done by individual cartographers that were etching on copper plates, and they're just really wonderful to look at. And in many cases, they had features that aren't on the US topos that we have now. When we moved to a digital system, we had to sacrifice some of the really detailed cartography or elements for the sake of automation. To be able to do 15 or 18,000 maps a year, we didn't have the time or resources to look at all the different features that could be on there, or spend a couple of months looking at just one map. So that's probably another reason. Plus, it's a great way to look at change detection. If you have a historical map over the same area, or 8 or 10 over the course of 80 years, it's a great way to see how urban areas have grown, how some features have changed, whether it's a landscape or hydrography or other anthropomorphic features.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Mike, thanks again. Really appreciate your time and sharing all that information with us. Unfortunately, time is against us now, so I need to keep us moving on. So thank you, Mike. Thanks also to all the speakers for the excellent presentations. That's really been good.